Hello and welcome back to the Harvest Manager configuration series. In this chapter, we'll be taking a look at the harvest nomenclature configurations. So the harvest nomenclature configurations define nomenclature rules allowing the creation of various name strings that follow a pattern. It works in support of the harvest use case behavior configuration. Whenever a build data item of type nameBuilder is invoked, the appropriate nomenclature configuration is accessed, and the applicable name pattern is identified. The resulting name string is then used during creation or update of a given entity during harvest. Here is a sample abbreviation for the nomenclature config. So the pattern is hm nomenclature config underscore entity. So an example is for germplasm. So how do we define the config abbreviations for harvest nomenclature configurations? So there can be multiple nomenclature configurations in the database, and each configuration corresponds to a basic entity like germplasm or seed. Sometimes it can also correspond to some special entities, such as taxonomy name, which is typically added as a germplasm attribute in some of the use cases. So for basic entities, we have the following examples. We have nomenclature config for germplasm, for seed, and for package. And for special entities, we have here are some examples. We have config for taxonomy name, and config for backcross derivative name. So for basic entities, the type must be set to nameBuilder in this config item. So for example, here's a sample for designation. So we have type nameBuilder. And if this is the case for basic entities, the entity is identified by whatever is the current entity being processed. So for example, this data item exists under the data of the germplasm entity. So this entity will be used to locate the correct abbreviation for the nomenclature config in the database. So for example, we have entity germplasm. So the config to be retrieved will be will have the abbrev hm nomenclature config germplasm. So that's how nomenclature config works for basic entities. Up next, we have special entities. If a nameBuilder is invoked for a special entity, aside from the type nameBuilder, we also must specify the special type, which which will determine the suffix of the config abbrev for the nomenclature config. So an example here is we have a special type defined as taxonomy name. So when we're trying to locate the configuration for naming for this particular name, the special type will be used as the identifier or the suffix in the abbrev. So in this case, the config abbrev to be retrieved will be hm nomenclature config underscore taxonomy name. So that is how special entities work with the nameBuilder data item type. And then we also actually have some or a way to define custom patterns as well. So we can define custom one-off name patterns within a data item of type nameBuilder. And to do this, we must provide the custom pattern property. So this custom pattern property is a JSON array, and each JSON object in this array is a segment that is part of the name pattern. So this is the contents of this custom pattern is actually similar to what we would see in the special entity and basic entity configurations that we have in the database. So this is just an added feature for, again, one-off name patterns that aren't really used anywhere else and just used in a specific use case. So there's no need to define a special configuration for it if it's just going to be used one time and not really shared across multiple use cases. So let's go back to our example. So again, we have this germplasm here, and in this germplasm, for the designation, we actually did invoke the name builder data item type to build the designation for the new germplasm. And the expected pattern here is planted germplasm designation appended with a delimiter dash and a free text p. So for this entity, we need to populate the HM nomenclature config germplasm configuration, since the entity here is germplasm, and we're trying to build the designation or the germplasm name via the name builder data item type. So to do this, well, actually before that, we must write the criteria first. So again, when we're defining configurations, we go back to our main config structure, and based on the criteria, let's try to write the criteria for our config item. So this will go as one of the config items in the nomenclature config for germplasm. So again, we have crop equal to wheat, and then cross method abbrev selfing, state not fixed, and we also have harvest method abbrev equal to bulk. So that's what we have for the criteria over here in our config item that we will add to this configuration. Next, so each config item in the nomenclature configurations contain a pattern property. So this is a JSON array, and similar to the custom pattern, each JSON object defines a segment in a name pattern, and they are called pattern items. So anything that goes inside this pattern array is called a pattern item. So how do we define pattern items? So each pattern item defines a segment in the name pattern, and it works similarly to how the data building works, as we've seen in the harvest use case configurations. There are just some slight differences, but let's take a look at this example. So here we define a pattern, and we're in this pattern we have 3 pattern items. We have this one, we have this one, and finally this one. So in the pattern, we can use different types as well. As you can see, we can also use data buckets here, and then we have a delimiter type and also a free text type. So let's look at what our options are for the pattern item types. So unlike with the data items from our previous discussions, pattern items have a limited number of supported types. So the first one is the data bucket. So this works similarly as it would in harvest use case behavior configuration. So you can check the guide here again in our Confluence page if you would like. So yeah, it's the same principle basically, and we can use pull data from various data buckets. The second one is delimiters, and we can specify delimiter values, separating other string segments in a name pattern, and then we define it with the value property, so as you can see here. And then we also have free text, which is very similar to plain text that we have in our data building. So it's the same sort of concept. So we can define a free text and the value, and then that's it. And then we also have database sequences, which is based on an available sequence in the database. So for example, here we have DB sequence, sequence schema, germplasm, and then the sequence name is GID _SEQ. And then for pattern items, you also have an additional um, uh, what's this property, which is the order number. So we just add the order number to indicate the order of this segment within the pattern. So it's a 0 index. So the first segment will be 0, the second will be 1, the third will be 2, and so on. And then also we have a counter type, which we typically use in numbered use cases like single plant selection. And for more information, again, you can visit the Confluence pages for a more in-depth view in these types of pattern items for the nomenclature configurations. So let's go back to our presentation, and let's go back to our example again. So we can see here that this is the expected pattern for our new germplasm name or our designation. So to define this as a pattern in our nomenclature config, we can define it like this. So again, we have 3 segments that we can identify here. First is the designation of the planted germplasm. That's the first segment. Second segment is we have a delimiter, which is the value is dash in this case, and we also have a suffix, which the value is b in this case. So those are our 3 segments. So we can define that within the pattern. And for the first one, again, we've seen this in an earlier example. So we can use the data bucket type. So we'll pull the designation of the planted germplasm from the planted bucket and use that as the first segment in our pattern. So that's done with. And for the next pattern, again, we also have the order number indicating the order or the placement of this in our pattern. So this particular segment is the first one, so the order number is 0. And then for the second part, which is the delimiter, so we just use the type delimiter and use the value dash, which is the expected delimiter value based on definition. And then finally, we have a free text for the suffix, which the value is b. And so we just add the order number as well. So this is now our pattern for the germplasm name. So once we add this to our germplasm nomenclature config record in the database, then the error that we saw in our previous trial should go away. So let's actually try to build the config item now. So again, we have the criteria here, the crop code wheat, cross method abrev selfing, state not fixed, harvest method abrev bulk, and then we have under config we have the pattern, which is what we built over here earlier. So now let's try to update the germplasm name configuration with this value and add this config item. So I'm going to open again my PG admin, and I'll just add this new config item to our germplasm nomenclature config. So you can see the abrev here, and I'm just updating it to that value. So now I'll try to update. Oops, I'm sorry. There seems to be an error. Wait, let me just figure this out. Okay, there we go. All right, so now we've updated our nomenclature config for germplasm. So for the nomenclature configs and use case configs, we don't need to log out and log back in, since it's taking place in the back end. So it's not really affected by the UI limitations. So let's go back to our example. So remember, when we tried to harvest this after specifying an entity to create the germplasm in the use case behavior, the harvest still failed because there were no nomenclature configurations found for the germplasm entity. So now let's try to revert this harvest and retry the harvest again. So once the harvest is set to ready, we can go back to the creation tab and click on the create button again to try and create the harvest record. So just a recap, at the moment we do have just one entity defined in our use case behavior config, which is germplasm. So it will, at this point, it's just going to create one germplasm record. And then that will not appear yet in the UI, since for the UI, for germplasm records to appear in the UI, we do need a germplasm name record. So we'll just try to query that in in pgadmin, so we can see if the record is actually created. So without further ado, let's click on create and click proceed to try and create the harvest records. After a while, let's check on the notifications, and you can see here that the notification now states that the creation of harvest records was successful. So again, if we go to the management tab, we won't see any records yet, and we won't be able to search for the germplasm yet, but we can do it directly in the database. So going back to the expected pattern, so we're just taking the planted designation and appending -b to it. So our planted designation is this one. So to search for the germplasm, newly created germplasm, we will try to search for it, but we'll append -b. So we have it here. So here we're just checking for non-voided germplasm records where the designation is the expected germplasm designation that we have created during the harvest. So upon searching, as you can see, the record was actually created. So this is not voided. And if we check, so is void is equal to false, and yeah, this is the germplasm we have. So we can see the planted germplasm name, and it's appended with -b now. The generation is F2 as we've expected. The parentage is the same as the previous germplasm. The state is not fixed. Germplasm name type is selection history. The crop code and taxonomy ID are also filled in properly. And we also have the germplasm type, which is segregating. So as we can see, it was the background worker for harvest creation was able to create the germplasm record based on what we've defined in our harvest use case definition or behavior configuration. And we can see that the error due to the missing nomenclature config also went away, because we've also updated our nomenclature config for germplasm, and it's now able to create successfully the germplasm record, at the very least at this point. So that's it for this chapter. In the next chapter, we'll try to complete the use case definition by also defining the entities for germplasm name, seed, and package to complete the harvest use case definition. So until then, see you later. Thanks for listening.